1. Hegel remarks somewhere that all great world historic facts and personages appear, so to speak, twice. He forgot to add, the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. Caussidière for Danton, Louis Blanc for Robespierre, the Montaigne of 1848 to 51 for the Montaigne of 1793 to 95, the nephew for the uncle. And the same caricature occurs in the circumstances of the second edition of the 18th Brumaire. Men make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. And just as they seem to be occupied with revolutionizing themselves and things, creating something that did not exist before, precisely in such epochs of revolutionary crisis, they anxiously conjure up the spirits of the past to their service, borrowing from them names, battle slogans, and costumes in order to present this new scene in world history in time-honored disguise and borrowed language. Thus Luther put on the mask of the Apostle Paul. The revolution of 1789 to 1814 draped itself alternately in the guise of the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, and the revolution of 1848 knew nothing better to do than to parody. Now 1789, now the revolutionary tradition of 1793 to 95. In like manner, the beginner who has learned a new language always translates it back into his mother tongue, but he assimilates the spirit of the new language and expresses himself freely in it only when he moves in it without recalling the old and when he forgets his native tongue. When we think about this conjuring up of the dead of world history, a salient difference reveals itself. Camille Desmoulins, Danton, Robespierre, Saint-Just, Napoleon, the heroes as well as the parties and the masses of the old French Revolution perform the task of their time, that of unchaining and establishing modern bourgeois society, in Roman costumes and with Roman phrases. The first one destroyed the feudal foundation and cut off the feudal heads that had grown on it. The other created inside France the only conditions under which free competition could be developed, parceled out land properly used, and the unfettered productive power of the nation employed. And beyond the French borders it swept away feudal institutions everywhere, to provide, as far as necessary, bourgeois society in France with an appropriate up-to-date environment on the European continent. Once the new social formation was established, the antediluvian colossi disappeared, and with them also the resurrected Romanism. The Brutuses, the Gracchi, the Publicolas, the tribunes, the senators, and Caesar himself. Bourgeois society, in its sober reality, bred its own true interpreters and spokesmen in the Say, Cousin, Royer Collard, Benjamin Constant, and Guizot. Its real military leaders sat behind the office desk, and the hog-headed Louis XVIII was its political chief. Entirely absorbed in the production of wealth and in peaceful competitive struggle, it no longer remembered that the ghosts of the Roman period had watched over its cradle. But unheroic though bourgeois society is, it nevertheless needed heroism, sacrifice, terror, civil war, and national wars to bring it into being. And in the austere classical traditions of the Roman Republic, the bourgeois gladiators found the ideals and the art forms, the self-deceptions, that they needed to conceal from themselves the bourgeois limited content of their struggles and to keep their passion on the high plane of great historic tragedy. Similarly, at another stage of development, a century earlier, Cromwell and the English people had borrowed from the Old Testament the speech, emotions, and illusions for their bourgeois revolution. When the real goal had been achieved and the bourgeois transformation of English society had been accomplished, Locke supplanted Habakkuk. Thus the awakening of the dead in those revolutions served the purpose of glorifying the new struggles, not of parodying the old, of magnifying the given task in the imagination, not recoiling from its solution in reality, of finding once more the spirit of revolution, not making its ghost walk again. From 1848 to 1851, only the ghost of the old revolution circulated. From Marrast, the républicain en gants jaunes, Republican in yellow gloves, who disguised himself as Old Bailey, down to the adventurer who hides his trivial and repulsive features behind the iron death mask of Napoleon. A whole nation which thought it had acquired an accelerated power of motion by means of a revolution suddenly finds itself set back into a defunct epoch, and to remove any doubt about the relapse, the old dates arise again, the old chronology, the old names, the old edicts, which had long since become a subject of antiquarian scholarship, and the old minions of the law who had seemed long dead. The nation feels like the mad Englishman in Bedlam, who thinks he is living in the time of the old pharaohs and daily bewails the hard labor he must perform in the Ethiopian gold mines, immured in this subterranean prison, a pale lamp fastened to his head, the overseer of the slaves behind him with a long whip, and at the exits a confused welter of barbarian war slaves who understand neither the forced labors nor each other, since they speak no common language. And all this, sighs the mad Englishman, is expected of me, a freeborn Briton, in order to make gold for the pharaohs. In order to pay the debts of the Bonaparte family, sighs the French nation. The Englishman, so long as he was not in his right mind, could not get rid of his idée fixe of mining gold. The French, so long as they were engaged in revolution, could not get rid of the memory of Napoleon, as the election of December 10th, 1848, when Louis Bonaparte was elected president of the French Republic by plebiscite, was proved. They longed to return from the perils of revolution to the fleshpots of Egypt, and December 2nd, 1851, the date of the coup d'etat by Louis Bonaparte, was the answer. Now they have not only a caricature of the old Napoleon, but the old Napoleon himself, caricatured as he would have to be in the middle of the 19th century. The social revolution of the 19th century cannot take its poetry from the past, but only from the future. It cannot begin with itself before it has stripped away all superstition about the past. The former revolutions required recollections of past world history in order to smother their own content. The revolution of the 19th century must let the dead bury their dead in order to arrive at its own content. There the phrase went beyond the content. Here the content goes beyond the phrase. The February Revolution was a surprise attack, a seizing of the old society unaware, and the people proclaim this unexpected stroke a deed of world importance, ushering in a new epoch. On December 2nd, the February Revolution is conjured away as a card-sharp trick, and what seems overthrown is no longer the monarchy, but the liberal concessions that had been wrung from it through centuries of struggle. Instead of society having conquered a new content for itself, it seems that the state has only returned to its oldest form, to a shamelessly simple rule by the sword and the monk's cowl. This is the answer to the coup de main of February 1848, given by the coup de tête of December 1851. Easy come, easy go. Meantime, the interval did not pass unused. During 1848 to 51, French society, by an abbreviated revolutionary method, caught up with the studies and experiences which in a regular, so to speak, textbook course of development would have preceded the February Revolution, if the latter were to be more than a mere ruffling of the surface. Society seems now to have retreated to behind its starting point. In truth, it has first to create for itself the revolutionary point of departure, the situation, the relations, the conditions under which alone modern revolution becomes serious. Bourgeois revolutions, like those of the 18th century, storm more swiftly from success to success. Their dramatic effects outdo each other. Men and things seem set in sparkling diamonds. Ecstasy is the order of the day. But they are short-lived. Soon they have reached their zenith, and a long Katzenjammer takes hold of society before it learns to assimilate the results of its storm and stress period soberly. On the other hand, proletarian revolutions, like those of the 19th century, constantly criticize themselves, constantly interrupt themselves in their own course, return to the apparently accomplished, in order to begin anew. They deride with cruel thoroughness the half-measures, weaknesses, and paltriness of their first attempts, seem to throw down their opponents only so the latter may draw new strength from the earth and rise before them again more gigantic than ever, recoil constantly from the indefinite colossalness of their own goals, until a situation is created which makes all turning back impossible, and the conditions themselves call out. Hic rhodus, hic salta, here is the rose, here dance. For the rest, every fair observer, even if he had not followed the course of French development step by step, must have had a presentiment of the imminence of an unheard-of disgrace for the revolution. It was enough to hear the complacent yelps of victory with which the Democrats congratulated each other on the expectedly gracious consequences of the second Sunday in May, 1852, day of the elections. Louis Bonaparte's term was expired. In their minds, that second Sunday of May had become a certain idea, a dogma, like the day of Christ's reappearance, and the beginning of the millennium in the minds of the Chiliasts. As always, weakness had taken refuge in a belief in miracles, believed the enemy to be overcome when he was only conjured away in imagination, and lost all understanding of the present in an inactive glorification of the future that was in store for it, and the deeds it had in mind, but did not want to carry out yet. Those heroes who seek to disprove their demonstrated incapacity by offering each other their sympathy and getting together in a crowd had tied up their bundles, collected their laurel wreaths in advance, and occupied themselves with discounting on the exchange market the Republic's in partibus, in name only, for which they had already providently organized the government personnel with all the calm of their unassuming disposition. December 2nd struck them like a thunderbolt from a clear sky, and those who in periods of petty depression gladly let their inner fears be drowned by the loudest renters will perhaps have convinced themselves that the times are past when the cackle of geese could save the capital. The Constitution, the National Assembly, the dynastic parties, the blue and red Republicans, the heroes of Africa, the thunder from the platform, the sheet lightning of the daily press, the entire literature, the political names and the intellectual reputations, the civil law and the penal code, liberté, égalité, fraternité, and the second Sunday in May, 1852, all have vanished, like a phantasmagoria before the spell of a man whom even his enemies do not make out to be a sorcerer. Universal suffrage seems to have survived only for the moment, so that with its own hand it may make its last will and testament before the eyes of all the world, and declare in the name of the people itself, all that exists deserves to perish. Goethe's Faust, Part 1. It is not enough to say, as the French do, that their nation was taken unawares. Nations and women are not forgiven the unguarded hour in which the first adventurer who came along could violate them. Such turns of speech do not solve the riddle, but only formulate it differently. It remains to be explained how a nation of 36 millions can be surprised and delivered without resistance into captivity by 3 nights of industry. Let us recapitulate in general outline the phases that the French Revolution went through from February 24th, 1848 to December 1851. 3 main periods are unmistakable. The February period, the period of the Constitution of the Republic or the Constituent National Assembly, May 1848 to May 28th, 1849, and the period of the Constitutional Republic or the Legislative National Assembly, May 28, 1849 to December 2nd, 1851. The first period, from February 24th, the overthrow of Louis Philippe, to May 4th, 1848, the meeting of the Constituent Assembly, the February period proper may be designated as the prologue of the Revolution. Its character was officially expressed in the fact that the government it improvised itself declared that it was provisional, And, like the government, everything that was mentioned, attempted, or enunciated during this period proclaimed itself to be only provisional. Nobody and nothing ventured to lay any claim to the right of existence and of real action. All the elements that had prepared or determined the revolution, the dynastic opposition, the republican bourgeoisie, the democratic republican petty bourgeoisie, and the social democratic workers provisionally found their place in the February government. It could not be otherwise. The February days originally intended an electoral reform by which the circle of the politically privileged among the possessing class itself was to be widened, and the exclusive domination of the aristocracy of finance overthrown. When it came to the actual conflict, however, when the people mounted the barricades, the National Guard maintained a passive attitude, the army offered no serious resistance, and the monarchy ran away. The Republic appeared to be a matter of course. Every party construed it in its own way. Having secured it, arms in hand, the proletariat impressed its stamp upon it and proclaimed it to be a social republic. There was thus indicated the general content of the modern revolution, a content which was in most singular contradiction to everything that, with the material available, with the degree of education attained by the masses, under the given circumstances and relations, could be immediately realized in practice. On the other hand, the claims of all the remaining elements that had collaborated in the February Revolution were recognized by the lion's share they obtained in the government. In no period, therefore, do we find a more confused mixture of high-flown phrases and actual uncertainty and clumsiness, of more enthusiastic striving for innovation and more deeply rooted domination of the old routine, of more apparent harmony of the whole of society and more profound estrangement of its elements. While the Paris proletariat still revelled in the vision of the wide prospects that had opened before it and indulged in seriously meant discussions of social problems, the old powers of society had grouped themselves, assembled, reflected, and found unexpected support in the mass of the nation, the peasants and the petits bourgeois, who all at once stormed onto the political stage after the barriers of the July monarchy had fallen. The second period, from May 4th, 1848 to the end of May 1849, is the period of the Constitution, the foundation of the bourgeois republic. Immediately after the February days, not only had the dynastic opposition been surprised by the Republicans, and the Republicans by the Socialists, but all France by Paris. The National Assembly, which met on May 4th, 1848, had emerged from the national elections and represented the nation. It was a living protest against the pretensions of the February days and was to reduce the results of the revolution to the bourgeois scale. In vain the Paris proletariat, which immediately grasped the character of this National Assembly, attempted on May 15th, a few days after it met, to negate its existence forcibly, to dissolve it, to disintegrate again into its constituent parts the organic form in which the proletariat was threatened by the reacting spirit of the nation. As is known, May 15th had no other result but that of removing Blanqui and his comrades, that is, the real leaders of the Proletarian Party, from the public stage for the entire duration of the cycle we are considering. The bourgeois monarchy of Louis Philippe can be followed only by a bourgeois republic. That is to say, whereas a limited section of the bourgeoisie ruled in the name of the king, the whole of the bourgeoisie will now rule in the name of the people. The demands of the Paris proletariat are utopian nonsense, to which an end must be put. To this declaration of the Constituent National Assembly, the Paris proletariat replied with the June insurrection, the most colossal event in the history of European civil wars. The bourgeois republic triumphed. On its side stood the aristocracy of finance, the industrial bourgeoisie, the middle class, the petits bourgeois, the army, the lumpen proletariat organized as the mobile guard, the intellectual lights, the clergy, and the rural population. On the side of the Paris proletariat stood none but itself. More than 3,000 insurgents were butchered after the victory, and 15,000 were deported without trial. With this defeat, the proletariat passes into the background on the revolutionary stage. It attempts to press forward again on every occasion, as soon as the movement appears to make a fresh start, but with ever decreased expenditure of strength, and always slighter results. As soon as one of the social strata above it gets into revolutionary ferment, the proletariat enters into an alliance with it, and so shares all the defeats that the different parties suffer, one after another. But these subsequent blows become the weaker, the greater the surface of society over which they are distributed. The more important leaders of the proletariat in the assembly and in the press successively fall victim to the courts, and ever more equivocal figures come to head it. In part, it throws itself into doctrinaire experiments, exchange banks, and workers' associations, hence into a movement in which it renounces the revolutionizing of the old world by means of the latter's own great combined resources, and seeks, rather, to achieve its salvation behind society's back, in private fashion, with its limited conditions of existence, and hence necessarily suffers shipwreck. It seems to be unable either to rediscover revolutionary greatness in itself, or to win new energy from the connections newly entered into, until all classes with which it contended in June themselves lie prostrate behind it. But at least it succumbs with the honours of the great world historic struggle. Not only France, but all Europe trembles at the June earthquake, while the ensuing defeats of the upper classes are so cheaply bought that they require barefaced exaggeration by the victorious party to be able to pass for events at all, and become the more ignominious the further the defeated party is removed from the proletarian party. The defeat of the June insurgents, to be sure, had levelled the ground on which the bourgeois republic could be founded and built. But it had shown at the same time that in Europe the questions at issue are other than that of republic or monarchy. It had revealed that here bourgeois republic signifies the unlimited despotism of one class over other classes. It had proved that in countries with an old civilization, with a developed formation of classes, with modern conditions of production, and with an intellectual consciousness in which all traditional ideas have been dissolved by the work of centuries, the republic signifies, in general, only the political form of revolution or bourgeois society, and not its conservative form of life. As, for example, in the United States of North America, where, though classes already exist, they have not yet become fixed, but continually change and interchange their elements in constant flux, where the modern means of production, instead of coinciding with a stagnant surplus population, rather compensate for the relative deficiency of heads and hands, and where, finally, the feverish, youthful movement of material production, which has to make a new world of its own, has neither time nor opportunity left for abolishing the old world of ghosts. During the June days, all classes and parties had united in the party of order against the proletarian class as the party of anarchy, of socialism, of communism. They had saved society from the enemies of society. They had given out the watchwords of the old society, property, family, religion, order, to their army as passwords, and had proclaimed to the counter-revolutionary crusaders, "In this sign thou shalt conquer." From that moment, as soon as one of the numerous parties which gathered under this sign against the June insurgents seeks to hold the revolutionary battlefield in its own class interest, it goes down before the cry, "Property, family, religion, order." Society is saved just as often as the circle of its rulers contracts, as a more exclusive interest is maintained against a wider one. Every demand of the simplest bourgeois financial reform, of the most ordinary liberalism, of the most formal republicanism, of the most shallow democracy, is simultaneously castigated as an attempt on society and stigmatized as socialism. And finally, the high priests of religion and order themselves are driven with kicks from their Pythian tripods, hauled out their beds in the darkness of night, put in prison vans, thrown into dungeons, or sent into exile. Their temple is razed to the ground, their mouths are sealed, their pens broken, their law torn to pieces in the name of religion, of property, of the family, of order. Bourgeois fanatics for order are shot down on their balconies by mobs of drunken soldiers, their domestic sanctuaries profaned, their houses bombarded for amusement. In the name of property, of the family, of religion and of order. Finally, the scum of bourgeois society forms the holy phalanx of order, and the hero Krapulinski, a character from Heine's poem The Two Knights, a dissolute aristocrat, installs himself in the Tuileries as the savior of society.